Okay, everyone, we are going to begin. Thank you for joining us, and I hope your day is going well so far. My name is Ben Dancer, and I work at Mentor Canada as our Manager of Quality Mentoring and Capacity Building. And today I will be facilitating our third Visiting Expert Series conversation with Dr. Christian Rummell, focusing on mentoring for 2SLGBTQIA plus youth. Dr. Rummell is a highly respected expert in this area, and we're thrilled to host them as our third visiting expert. I've had the pleasure of listening to one of Dr. Rummell's presentations in the past, and it was extremely moving and informative, so I think we're really in for a treat today. Before we begin, Mentor Canada respectfully acknowledges that the lands upon which we operate are the traditional territories of the respective First Nations, Métis Nations, and Inuit, who are the longtime stewards of these lands. So we really encourage you to please participate in today's event. These meetings are much more engaging, productive, and fun when we hear from you, the audience. So please participate today in ways that you feel comfortable. So you can introduce yourself in the chat. So please share your name, organization, and what you're hoping to learn today. And don't forget to ask your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. At the end of today's presentation, there will be some dedicated time for some Q&A with Christian. So don't hesitate to ask your questions in there. And then finally, as you've likely noticed, today's event will be recorded and shared with all registrants. So we have 4 items on our agenda today. I'll begin by talking very briefly about Mentor Canada, who we are and what we do, and a little bit about the purpose of the Visiting Expert Series. I'll then turn it over to Christian for him to provide his presentation. And then, as I said, we'll have some Q&A with the audience, and then I'll wrap up by discussing some additional resources and tools that Mentor Canada can provide you at no cost if you're interested. At Mentor Canada, our mission and vision is to accelerate and scale world-class mentoring in Canada. So we're a national organization dedicated to convening, supporting, and building capacity to really strengthen the fields and increase quality mentoring opportunities in our country, especially for equity-deserving youth across Canada. And if you'd like to learn more about us and the work that we do, you can visit mentorcanada.ca. And today's Visiting Expert Series is presented as a part of our quality mentoring system, which is a system of tools and resources that we developed with leading mentoring researchers and practitioners in Canada to enhance the quality of mentoring opportunities for young people in our country. All resources are offered in both French and English and at no cost to nonprofits and charities in Canada. So if you want to learn more about the quality mentoring system, you can scan the QR code or visit qualitymentoring.ca or send me an email after today's event. As you can see in the lower left of your screen, one component of the quality mentoring system is a community of practice. This is where we host and convene live events, such as this one, for a national community of mentoring professionals to help them advance their knowledge and skills to support quality mentoring. And so if you're not already a member of our community of practice, you can join now for free by visiting qualitymentoring.ca, or again, by scanning that QR code in the top left hand of your screen. And by becoming a member, you'll be the first to receive all the updates, practical resources, and news about events within the community. So I really encourage you to sign up if you haven't already done so already. And so that brings us to today's event, which is the Visiting Expert Series. And so in a nutshell, this event is basically where we host facilitated live discussions with subject matter experts, such as Dr. Rummell. And within these events, experts are invited to create custom and tailored presentations for Mentor Canada's community of practice. So it is very focused on the Canadian context and mentoring field. And as a member of the community of practice, you can suggest topics and subject matter experts for us to go out and invite to provide presentations to the community. So as I said, this is our third visiting expert series. So very briefly, if you didn't have a chance to check them out, our first expert series was hosted by Dr. Bernadette Sanchez, who's a professor at the University of Illinois, Chicago, who joined us to discuss the intersections between race, ethnicity, and culture and mentoring relationships. And so during that conversation, we talked about, what is this idea of cultural humility? What is ethnic racial identity, and how can we support positive ethnic racial identities through mentoring relationships? And then how can we train mentors in cultural humility and anti-racism? And then some of the practical implications for the Canadian mentoring ecosystem. So if you'd like to check that out, you can scan the QR code or just visit our YouTube channel. Just type in Mentor Canada in YouTube and you'll find the recording of that event. Our second visiting expert series was hosted by Dr. Michael Karcher, who is a professor at the University of Texas, San Antonio, and he joined us to discuss peer mentoring for the 21st century. So during that discussion, he talked about, what is peer mentoring? What are some of the evidence-informed practices for developing and maintaining effective peer mentoring programs? And then, of course, always the practical implications for Canadian mentoring practitioners. So again, you can scan the QR code or visit YouTube to see the recording of that event. So without further ado, that brings us to today's visiting expert series with Dr. Christian Rummell, who has over 25 years of experience as a researcher, training and technical assistance provider, and practitioner in the youth mentoring field. And as I said at the outset of today's event, really is a leading expert in this area and on mentoring for 2SLGBTQIA plus youth. And he's also the co-author of the LGBTQ Youth Supplement to the Elements of Effective Practice. So a really experienced professional and expert that we have the fortune of hearing from today. So without further ado, I will hand over the mic and the screen to Christian to take it over.
Thank you very much, Ben, and Mentor Canada for including me and this topic in today's series. I want to say that I may be a little clunky with my my webinar PowerPoint skills, but if indeed I am doing anything, Ben, please let me know if I'm messing up. So first of all, wanted to give you all a sense of what our agenda looks like for today. And so we're going to do a little bit more of kind of a welcome and introductions. And then I'll delve much more deeply into research. And so looking at the differences between affirming and rejecting climates for 2SLGBTQIA plus youth. And then I'm going to jump a little bit more into those intentional relationship actions, the things that mentors can do, caring adults, those of us that have been in staff positions in youth serving programs. There are a number of ways we can encourage what I'm calling assets of pride, or some of those things upstream that can make a difference in changing some of those trajectories that we're starting to see. The other part that I want to really look more closely at is the supplement itself to the Elements of Effective Practice, which highlights a lot about the intentionally affirming program climates and different actions you can take as far as your recruitment and screening and training and ongoing support for matches involving this population. And then we'll do some Q&A. I do want to say I will be interchanging 2SLGBTQIA with queer and LGBTQ+. They're all umbrella terms that reflect this real diversity of spectrums of identities, orientations, expressions that are all part of this group of young people that we're going to be discussing today. So with that said, thank you all for starting to put things into the chat box. I've been seeing a lot of great comments about questions that you have, and a lot of you are really looking for strategies to support or to create that affirming and safer, protective climate that's inclusive. And so I really want to highlight that that is something that we'll be talking a bit about today. I'd also love, as far as your introduction to me, if you could just share on a scale of 1 to 5 your experience or your knowledge in providing services to LGBTQ plus young people. So 1 would be just a little, maybe you have a lot of questions. 5 could be that you have lived experience, you have folks in your life that you've really learned from or advocated for. So in the chat box, if you could add in just on a scale of 1 to 5, where you fall as far as those kind of the knowledge that you possess. So great. Thank you. It looks like we got a lot of 4s. We've got a 2, a 5, 3. So the reason I wanted to also do this is that Mentor Canada is talking about a community of folks that are coming together to be able to be part of the resources that you all can share with each other. That there are those of you that are knowledgeable in this particular subject matter topic, and that I would highly encourage you to look at those folks, learn from them. If you are from the community, feel free to share a little bit more about your experiences and about your entry point, and do this in a way that invites other folks in. So I will share a little bit more about my entry point. And so as Ben mentioned, I've been in the research space for a number of years. I've really been focusing a lot on mentoring, but I've done a lot of other research on LGBTQ plus youth that have experienced homelessness, that are in the juvenile justice systems, and really looking at some of these kind of protective factors that can make a difference. And so with that said, a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about today are located on my website, mentorist.org. There'll be different studies I might refer to, or the supplement, or an online training that's available and free that you could use yourself or with your volunteers. And so wanted to definitely guide you to that as a really good central point to learn more. So as I mentioned, all of us have different entry points into our experience as part of this community, and so I wanted to share a little bit more about my lived experience, and I do this in a way because all of this work requires vulnerability. It requires empathy. It requires each of us to sometimes go outside of our comfort zones in the way that we provide support, and also in the way that we share the humanness of who we are. And so my story is really focused on growing up in the 80s. I always knew that I was gay. I mean, it was something that from a very young age, I always felt very different. I was trying to figure out what that meant for me, but I always had heard messages that being gay was something I should be ashamed of. So all of those birthday wishes I had as a kid, I wished not to be gay. All of those 4-leaf clovers I would find, I wished that I had a different life. This is really compounded by what was happening in the early 80s, which was the start of HIV/AIDS. The image that I had of myself and of my future was that I would die alone in a hospital bed by myself. It was something that, as I thought about what I deserved and who I was, that was the path, that was the future that I saw for myself. It's a very difficult period of time for a lot of us in this cohort that are kind of in our 50s right now. It really shaped a lot of the way that we see intimacy, a lot of the way that we really, again, started to internalize those messages of who we were and are at a very young age. So I had that going on inside, but externally, I got picked on and I got bullied and I got pushed into lockers. And I would say for me, Dover High School, which is on the East Coast, was probably one of the four of the hardest years of my life because not only did I have that internal shame, I also had other people telling me who I was by the names that they were calling me. So for me, a good day was to get through the front door of that high school without letting somebody see me cry. Really difficult experience for me. And this is where I always get a little more emotional because in the next photo, it is that person that helped to change my trajectory. So this is my friend Melanie. Melanie is the person that I call a possibility model. She is the person in the 80s and early 90s that took me to New York City to see Broadway shows, to see positive representations of who I was and who I could be. She took me to Provincetown for my very first drag show that I, of course, got accosted by a drag queen while I was there. It was mortifying and it was lovely, and it showed the laughter that I could have with somebody I loved. Melanie helped me to see those parts of myself that deserved love, that could find love, and that could live a hopeful life. And so when I look at this last photo, a decade ago, I got married at San Francisco City Hall. My parents were there. My sister, my nephew and niece, they were part of this moment that I never thought I deserved. And I will say that Melanie was my best person at that wedding. And so whenever I think of the role that each of us can play, it is that part of what Melanie did for me, which was to share what I deserved as a hopeful human person that had all of the life options that were in front of me that for a lot of my youth, I didn't think I deserved or could actually obtain. So when I share the story, it really is about this idea of mentoring. It is about this idea that we can change trajectories through our messages, through the support we give, through the power of our relationships, because it can make a difference. And at least for me, it did make a difference. So I shared my story, my entry point, that was about 40 years ago. And I'd love if you all could share what you're seeing now as far as the climate that 2SLGBTQIA plus youth are growing up in. What are you seeing with young people and young adults in your communities, in your programs, in your spaces? What does this look like now? What are you seeing? So if you could type into the chat box and share what that looks like, that would be something I want to use as a framing to see just how far or how little we've come since I was growing up. So in the chat box, if you could add a few things that you're seeing or that you know from either the news. Thank you, Erica. Some families becoming more accepting, but at the same time, society and politics is pretty scary right now. I'll say that in the US, it's kind of a dumpster fire, and I'll talk about that. And unfortunately, I think some of the smoke is wafting north as far as some of the hate that's happening in our current climate here. A lot more awareness of gender diversity. There are more programs. There are a lot more access opportunities. more racialized queer and trans youth have less access to these spaces. So really looking at the intersections that maybe we didn't have conversations about before. I'm seeing the older generation still not understanding and accepting. And I think with the kids, it depends. It's not a great climate right now, especially in rural areas. There are some safer adults in spaces, but in general, youth feel isolated. Thank you so much for sharing some of these experiences. What I want to do is put this in context. And so I'll share a bit about what we're seeing as far as the trends and how they can play out. And so a lot of this is really meant to empower you to see how certain actions can result in certain trajectories, and also to see how some of the changes that you can make in your programming or in your intentional interactions can really alter what we're seeing as part of this day-to-day. So the research, and a lot of this will come from the US, but I do and will refer to a really great report from Mentor Canada as we go that highlights this kind of the similarities. To be honest, there are a lot of overlaps. And so I want to talk a little bit about this first study about what we're seeing at home for a lot of LGBTQ plus young people. And the Human Rights Campaign is a large organization here in the US that has been doing kind of a climate survey for young people to understand what their experiences are at home and at school and as far as their well-being. So this particular study came out a couple years ago. It had responses from almost 13,000 young people ages 13 to 18 all across the US. And it tells a pretty bleak story, to be honest, that 4 in 10 were out to all of their parents and guardians. About half of the trans respondents and gender expansive youth said that their family would never use correct pronouns. So we're really in a home that may not be honoring who they are. On the flip side, there is some glimmers. There are folks that about 1 in 7 said that their family always uses their pronoun, always respects who they are, is very thoughtful about that. But the trends are really, again, a bit heartbreaking because you're seeing a lot of young people saying that they're being taunted or mocked for who they are at home, that they're growing up in a family that maybe is speaking negatively, seeing things on the news, basically kind of using those sound bites. And as I talked about in my story, those young people are hearing those messages and internalizing that. They're feeling, especially from people they care about and are in their lives, what that value stream is. And so a lot of that ends up being that they may feel bad about being who they are, and that is at home. That trajectory plays out. And when we see rejecting homes, we start to see how that affects the well-being of a young person over time. And so there's a really great study that came out, and it's almost 15 years, but I think it still shows up in these trends from the data that I'm presenting. But Caitlin Ryan at the Family Acceptance Project found that youth that have had experiences with rejection more likely to report attempting suicide, more likely to engage in illegal drug use, risk-taking behaviors, and then also feeling more depressed. So it trends out. You also see it trending out where a lot of negative home climates, there is an increase in experiences with homelessness. And that could involve couch surfing. It could involve staying with friends and trying to get away from a home climate that isn't safe. And then that also plays out, at least here, where about a third of youth in a recent study by the Williams Institute in our child welfare systems were trans. So, or LGBTQ plus, 5% were trans. And then you also see it in juvenile justice settings where there are disproportionately high representation of kids that have, been in a home that they left and are now involved in delinquent acts. So in schools, we see the same. We know that a large majority of kids are not feeling safe right now. This particular study from GLSEN, they do this every other year. The new study should be coming out this year, but their latest one was 2022, and they had almost 23,000 respondents that were sharing who they were and their experiences in school. And 2/3 of the respondents were white, 33% identified as cisgender, 31% non-binary, and 30% identified as bisexual. So there was a range. And GLSEN, I will say, if you are interested in some of this data, they do break this data out by youth who are trans, youth that are non-binary, and they also look at youth of color in different settings too. So it's a really important data point to be familiar with. But again, the climate is not safe. You're hearing a lot of anti-gay remarks from peers. You also, I think, heartbreakingly enough, are hearing these remarks from teachers and from staff that should be in roles that care for all of the young people in their care, but are actually making negative comments about trans kids, about gender expansive and diverse young people. And then you see a lot of verbal harassment and physical harassment. And in the US, we just lost a young person, Next Benedict, who had been bullied at school and had basically, been assaulted in the bathroom, and the next day was died by suicide. And so it has been a heartbreaking story for a lot of us to hear, because so many of us saw ourselves in Nex, and we see again that climate and how difficult it is, and that the reality of these kind of trajectories really play out in lifelong implications. So when you are victimized in school, you're more likely to miss school. Why would you stay in school? Why would you go to class if you're getting picked on? Like, I can't tell you the number of times I just wanted to leave because I couldn't handle that experience. You don't feel like you belong. This is not a place that you feel safe, that you would want to connect with. And then, of course, your studies are going to decline. And so you'll see that as far as connectedness with school, those levels are much lower than straight and cisgender young people. But you also start having, reinforcements of feeling low self-esteem, feeling more depressed because you're isolated. And this gets reinforced in that setting as well. So well-being is another area that we look at in a lot of the research, and it's not a good trajectory right now. We're seeing that almost half of the young people in the latest Trevor Project study considered suicide in the last year. Large numbers reported anxiety, depression, wanting to receive mental health care, but not being able to actually access that. And that, it really is this trajectory that's playing out. It's really heartbreaking. And I keep using that word because it doesn't have to be that way. Mentor Canada also looked at these kind of experiences in a really great report. And I want to thank Mentor Canada for doing this, because we've really struggled in the US to find enough data that really looks at the importance and the experiences of mentoring for young people. And so what you found in your study was that you end up having a lot of the respondents were saying that they had experienced at least 2 risk factors during their teen year. Compared to cisgender and straight peers, they had lower rates of school completion, lower rates of pursuing education or training, lower rates of being currently employed because the age group that the survey respondents were 18 to 30. But it plays out, and you see the similarity. And I think one of the most important parts of this particular report is also that a lot of these young people are growing up without the support of a mentor, without that external support that could make a difference. And so when we really look at this as kind of a potential resource, we're not really creating it as a space that does respond to all of these really mission critical needs that are happening. I do want to say too, our landscape in the US is just horrific right now. And I cannot do anything other than to say that I am just feeling a lot of the same anxiety I had as a young person when I look at some of these kind of proposed bills, and then realizing that there is this huge amount of research that shows the difference we can make, but is actually reinforcing some of the climates that are going to be even more harmful and hurtful for young people. And so right now, and I'm crossing this out on my website, I have one of my modules looks at these laws and policies. And as of yesterday, there were 484 bills since the start of the year. There were 500 that were proposed last year. And there is a growing amount of research that says in states with these laws, there's more harassment happening of 2SLGBTQIA youth in schools and in communities. The Human Rights Campaign has said there's a national emergency for LGBTQ plus Americans because of this climate, that it is something that we're seeing a lot more violence directed towards people who are from the community. Canada has issued a travel advisory warning 2S LGBTQIA Canadians about travel to the US because of how hard some of these state laws would be, and the difficulty that could happen if you needed medical care, or if you used a restroom, or in some cases, one of the proposed laws here is that you would become a registered sex offender in Missouri. Now, this law did not pass, but it was something somebody has proposed, was in committee, and it said that if you support the social transitions of young people using pronouns, supporting their gender expression, that you, if you were in a role as a teacher or a counselor, could be charged with a sex offender offense. You would be on a registry. It is really, really a rough experience. And whether or not this law gets passed, the conversations we're seeing about this law are things that young people are hearing about themselves that are causing a lot of fear in how programs are able to provide support. It really is playing out in a way that's stigmatizing, victimizing, and causing fear. And also, if it does get passed, would be really something that would further enforce some of those negative life trajectories. Trevor Project found that every 45 seconds in the US, an 2S LGBTQIA plus young person attempts suicide. So if you think about this, in a period of an hour, how many young people are feeling that anguish, that struggle, that difficulty of being who they are? It's a really profound thing to be aware of. So with that said, I want to kind of pivot, because I have just shared a lot of heavy research and data that is not positive, that is not giving us hope. You all have some real experiences in supporting young people. You have some real strengths in the approach that mentoring offers some real supports that may not be available. I want to ask you in the chat box, could you share what you think makes a difference? How do we change those outcomes? What is it about our work in mentoring or just in being human, in our interactions, in our relationships, in our care, that would change some of the things that we've been seeing in all of those studies? Thank you, Erica. Education, compassion, support, building queer communities, being an advocate for change, providing a safer space that accounts for intersectional identities, also having fun. Yes. I love it. Rainbow Dungeons and Dragons. Awesome. Donating money, safety to LGBT, providing support and acceptance. All of those things are really very important instruments that you can leverage to make that difference. And all of this around positive regard, empathy, being an ally. I talk about ally as a verb. It is not something we do once. It's something we continually, intentionally show up and do again and again and again. It is a series of our actions that we have to continue living. And so that, for me, is one of the real important parts of how we change those outcomes, is being an ally over time, investing in, showing up, showing care, being vulnerable. Absolutely. When you're vulnerable, you let people in, you're inviting them into the humanness of who we are. I would also say there is this opportunity to be a possibility model in that vulnerability, to let people see all of the ways that you have overcome, all of the strengths you've used that they can also use in their lives. Showing young people about how it gets better is some of those real strategies. So I want to look a little bit more closely at what research is saying about different settings and how some of the actions you can take in your program can make a difference, especially when we're thinking about relationships. And the first part is supportive homes can make a huge difference. In homes where a young person was accepted, when a parent uses a pronoun or affirms a name, that young person has greater self-esteem. They engage in risk-taking behaviors in a much less frequent manner. There is a shift that happens when you feel like you are affirmed at home, that you're loved, that you're accepted for who you are. In school, it's also similar. We're seeing a lot about schools that have supportive climates, and that would include having folks that are from the community in visible roles. That would include having non-discrimination policies or confidentiality policies, or communities that are supportive of 2SLGBTQIA young people. In those spaces, reports of suicide attempts go down. So if you have a supportive climate, you end up really looking at a space where kids are probably feeling more connected, that they belong, that they see people like themselves. And so that really can come out in what we're seeing in research on GSAs, which are genders and sexualities alliances, or school clubs that bring together youth from the community and also allies so that they can have a place. It's hard to use the word safe because there are no safe places in reality, but we want to create safer places. We want to create places of belonging and affirming. But in those spaces where there are GSAs, there is greater belonging. There are reports that the young people from those communities have higher levels of self-esteem and lower levels of depression. Again, suicide shifts the conversation. You feel like you connect and belong and you're engaged and you feel supported. We see this in laws as well. In the US, there's some real great research about discrimination and structural stigma. And in those places that have laws that are more supportive, you have greater health outcomes for not only this community, but other marginalized populations. And that if you are an LGBTQ young person that's growing up in a community that's accepting, again, reports of attempting suicide go down. It shows that there is this importance around climate and creating messaging about how a young person would internalize who they are. One of the most important things when we think about mentoring is that this group of young people, if they had at least one accepting adult, so if they had access to a mentor or a big brother or a big sister or a big sibling, they would be less likely to report a suicide attempt in the last year. Just having that one person in their corner makes one of the biggest differences that we could ask for in our work. So some of those examples of what this looks like. So at home, it's talking to a child about their 2SLGBTQIA identity, bringing them to organizations, connecting them to events, supporting that child's identity, even if you may be uncomfortable. And so there's a layer here of helping parents along their own journey and guardians, so that if they are uncomfortable, connecting them to resources, giving them some opportunities to learn more about how their child can be fulfilled and live a hopeful life as well, because some of that may come from fear that they might have about the trajectories of what their kids might be experiencing. In school, comprehensive policies, having student-led GSAs, inclusive curriculums matter. Having representation in your classes. And again, what we're seeing in the US, they're actually trying to have don't say gay laws that have been proposed everywhere, which would mean you cannot have inclusive curriculums. You cannot have visibility of this topic in a school setting. In a lot of states that those laws have both been proposed and now are starting to come into fruition. As caring adults, supporting a child's gender expression, expressing affection and support when a child has those critical moments where they're sharing who they are, they're inviting you in, and then really having that belief that a child can have a happy future. I know when I came out to my mom, one of the things she said was, "I love you. I worry about what your life is going to look like, and that makes me sad." So those are the things that when we think of the support we can give, it really is kind of looking at ways to offer really kind of intensive support that fosters the self-worth, the value, the future orientation of what a young person might see for themselves. So I spent a good chunk of the last year being so frustrated with our climate that I wanted to create a resource that allowed folks to be able to learn a little bit more about what they could do, even if you were living in an area or a location that had such negative laws or harmful climates. And so one of the things that I did was just create this self-paced course on mentorist.org. And I looked at all of that research. What were all of the deficits? What were all of the things that we could do? And I identified 5 asset areas that could make a difference. And so the first was possibilities. How do you help a young person envision a hopeful future for themselves? And so there are things you can do in your messaging, in the way that you help them as far as a looking glass for them to start seeing new ways of understanding their strengths, of who they can be, letting them be able to understand that there is a life beyond this current moment, and helping to propel them along paths that inspire sparks for who they could be, and recognizing this is different than a role model. I mean, we talk about role models all the time in mentoring, and like, oh, you should emulate this person, they're good. A possibility model or showing possibility is helping a young person find one of those many paths that they could grow up into on their own. And it really is something, it came from Laverne Cox, who I heard that term from the very first time, who is a trans actress who is in a television show called Orange is the New Black. And so it really was something that resonated with me. How do you inspire possibilities and future thinking, especially for a person who may not be able to feel connected to their current moment? The other part is around resilience. And so giving what I'm calling a queer growth mindset, or that ability for a young person to understand that the current experiences they have with adversity don't have to remain static or fixed. And it's that idea of it gets better. A bunch of videos that we see that are out there about that kind of life will change. But this queer growth mindset is about helping a young person identify their strengths, their resources, their coping skills, and really connecting with a broader community to be able to find ways to bounce back after adversity. And that is really very central to having this queer identity, that there are these real important resources that they can channel. And that mindset helps them to see how it gets better. The other asset is identity. And this is a really important part of support that mentoring often provides, but hasn't really done a great job with identities around sexual orientation and gender identity. So one of the things that this module and these assets really focus on is how you can attune to the changes that a young person is going through as they're sharing who they are with you and the world around them. And that there are some real opportunities that mentors and caring adults can provide during those critical moments that give some emotional support, give resources, give informational support, and actually can help that young person continue to feel connected and belonged at some of those very most vulnerable moments. The other part of this is development. And so there really hasn't been a huge amount of research on positive youth development and 2SLGBTQIA young people, but the Search Institute has done a really great job at looking at developmental relationships. And so what are those kind of ways you can express care and really look at these elements of a developmental relationship and how it applies to an LGBTQIA young person, and recognizing that a lot of young people, just as the Mentor Canada report highlighted, they don't have access to mentors, but they also don't have access to these developmental relationships in their lives. They are growing up at a deficit that anytime you can infuse these practices into your mentoring time or your programming, it can make a big difference because it fosters some of those protective supports. And then the last asset of pride is this idea of engagement. How do you foster belonging at home, at school, and in your mentoring relationship? And so that module is coming out this week. And again, all of those are available free. They're on my website, and they are this direct response to what we saw as far as the climate and the trends, and giving you all and each of us actions we can take to show up and to make a big difference. The last resource I want to highlight is the program side of this, because I think there are a couple layers when we look at mentoring and we look at the support each of us give individually. This is the kind of very high level guidance from the LGBTQ plus supplement. And it really is basically arguing that mentoring business as usual is actually not going to make a big difference for this population. And in fact, well, actually, no, let me rephrase that. Let me take that. I'm going to walk that back. It can make a big difference for this group of young people. The importance is it ends up potentially placing them in harm's way if we haven't taken intentional steps. And so there are a number of things in our screening practices, in our training for volunteers, in the way that we monitor that could make a very big difference. For example, when we screen volunteers, are we making sure that we're screening out volunteers who could do harm to 2SLGBTQIA youth? Are we asking questions about how they would provide support during those critical moments? There are a lot of programs that I've worked with that would say, of course, we would accept them. They're great volunteers. We would be happy to have them. We just won't place them with a 2SLGBTQIA young person. And what is the problem with that? And so I'm going to ask you to share really quickly, what would be the problem with having accepting someone who says that they have a belief that they wouldn't believe or support a young person? Yep, Sarah, yes, youth could come out later. Youth will not always know. You won't know. So all of that, and then the mentor would be unsupportive. Thank you, Sarah, for screening those mentors out. Yes. So, but the thing is, you have to ask those questions. You have to find out if that potential volunteer, because we know the age groups of young people, when you're feeling different, when you are coming out for the first time, when you're enrolling in a program, all of those milestones of your identity may be happening over a period of time. And that period of time, you also may not have trust with the program whenever you're entering into it because you've been rejected or you've experienced adults that haven't been caring. So why would you invite them in to share who you are? So as a mentoring program, you really do have to think about the way that you would screen out all of those volunteers that could potentially do harm, because you don't know. You can't just match them with another young person that you assume is cisgender, that you assume is straight. So this supplement really walks you through all of those different areas. And the full report is really meaty. So I will say there's a lot of justifications in there, and you can read back and forth about why these recommendations are present. But some of the things really to think about are confidentiality, ensuring there's anti-bullying policies that are in place, and having that intentional commitment to making a difference. So really assessing your current practices and thinking about what it is along the lines of these guidance and suggestions you might be able to improve upon. All of which really do speak to some of the barriers that this group of young people is experiencing, and the reality that mentoring can be an amazing support. And as with mentoring, it is not a one size fits all. So looking at those types of real accommodations and translations for this group can really make a big difference. So I could probably spend 3 hours on the supplement. I'm trying to just do a very quick overview. I do encourage you to familiarize yourself with that. I think it does offer a really good series of benchmarks and strategies that you can use, again, as an ally, the verb, ongoing, something you do again and again in your programming, in your actions. So with that said, I have one small video, and I hope this plays, and I may not be able to have it play, but it is an example of what I hope all of you will do in your messaging and the way that you encourage those possibilities and that hopeful future.
Trans kids, my dazzling trans youngsters,
my young trans powerhouses,
my courageous trans buddies,
beautiful, extraordinary trans kids. Hi, we love you. That wasn't part of the script, but I added it.
You're extraordinary.
You're inspiring.
You're exactly who you're supposed to be. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
No one can erase who you are, no matter how hard they try. You are a gift to this world. You.
I hope you heard that. It really says so much to me about how mentors can give a young person those messages at a time that they don't hear their worth, their value, and who they can be. So I want to thank you for our time together and for the work you do. I know we have a few minutes for some questions. I also would love to hear, from you about some of the resources or supports that you think have mattered in your work. So it's open.
Thanks, Christian. That was, as always, informative and inspiring. And I always end up teary-eyed when I attend your presentation. So again, thank you for joining us and sharing your wisdom. You're such an advocate and a powerful researcher in this space. So yes, please, anyone, if you have questions, share them in the Q&A, in the chat, or just come off mute and ask, please. If no one has any questions, I have some.
I just was gonna share something. So I'm with BGC, Big Brothers Big Sisters of Edmonton and area, and so we've been providing like a queer mentoring program for many years. I've been here for about 20 years, and I think we've had this program. It started with our youth in care youth with children's services, and so children's services has been a big ally here. And so I think just importance I've really found throughout the growth of the program is just really having great partnerships with a lot of agencies that do have that knowledge. So we have more of the expertise, they say, in the mentoring area, where they have like that expertise of providing support, guidance, training for staff as well as volunteers and like the children, youth, and families who participate. It is like same thing as yourself, like our government has implemented a lot of legislation. So there's been a lot of like rallying here in Alberta because I feel we are going backwards, but that's just my viewpoint. And so I do really, sympathize with, but it is just nice. It's nice to hear this information because I do interview volunteers. So our program now is called the PRISM program. And so I do interview volunteers for our staff that do the matching, which has just been a great opportunity to meet so many wonderful people in those areas. But again, even though sometimes people do come from within that community, it is just making sure everybody's in the right space, right, to support one another. And sometimes that I do find sometimes the journeys of volunteers within the community, they are just starting their own journey, and so they're not at a place to kind of provide that support as of right now for a child or youth. So I sometimes feel that that's a difficult message because they are very strong people, and to walk through the door and do an interview with myself, I do appreciate that strike, but sometimes they just have started their journey, right? And so sometimes that is a tough message, right? In terms of delivering that, right? Sometimes I find, because it does hit your heart a little bit, right?
Thank you for sharing. I will say that I spent a good chunk of the last 7 or 8 years working with Big Brothers Big Sisters here in the US, helping the national organization build in a lot of the things that you've talked about. Partnerships locally can make a big difference, recognizing that the role a lot of you all play is in the mentoring space, but then there are all of these referrals and resources that can really add another layer. And recognizing you have to build trust with those partners. You have to have your queer cred to be able to access their supports, because they're going to be very protective of their kids, as they should be. And the recognizing that you have to keep showing up in the same way you do with a mentoring program again and again, being consistent, and also having that mutual support that you can offer them in that process. And so I really want to thank you for highlighting the partnership conversation, because that is such an important part of adding those extra layers of support that are needed in a lot of cases.
Yeah, thanks, Shelley. Christian, we have a question in the chat from Evelyn. I'm from a Big Brothers Big Sisters agency in Southern Ontario. do you believe that safe spaces can still be successfully cultivated if mentors are not part of the 2SLGBTQIA plus community? Can you think of any major do's or don'ts in regards to this?
Yeah, I mean, so the first part, there is this whole conversation about safe spaces, and I think a lot of at the moment there is this feeling that there are no safe spaces. So there are affirming spaces, there are inclusive spaces, but you're never going to be able to provide that protection because it is so hostile right now. So I want to say that that's part of this dialogue that's happening, is that there is this real kind of thought around that. In the supplement, we do talk about that exact same scenario, that if you have mentors that are empathetic, that have the ability to advocate and provide support, you don't have to be from the community. You can create a strong relationship. It's the same when you look at research on same and cross-race matches. There are a number of things that somebody that doesn't have lived experience, that isn't a credible messenger, can still offer, that can still make a difference. There is this other part that if you have somebody with that lived experience, they can share what that was for them. And so it's one of the many criteria that are important. And that would be, again, shared similarity, shared temperament, interest, and then what that mentor, what their particular background is and how they could be empathetic and provide support. That it is something that can make a difference. And so I'll leave it there, but there is a good chunk of that in the supplement on the recruitment and screening section.
Okay, everyone. So that concludes our webinar. I have a few final slides. So again, Christian mentioned it, and my colleague Veronique provided the link in the chat. But we do have some research on the mentoring effect for 2S LGBTQIA plus youth in Canada that you can access for free by visiting the QR code or visiting our website. And again, if you're not already a member of our community of practice, I recommend that you sign up for free at qualitymentoring.ca. And then finally, I just wanted to note some additional resources. So if you have any questions or further things that you want to discuss about today's webinar, you can send me an email at ben.dancer@mentorcanada.ca. Also, I encourage you to check out our quality mentoring system, which is a free resource that you can use to increase the quality of your mentoring opportunities. And that can be accessed at qualitymentoring.ca. We also have a mentor connector where you can expand the reach of your organization by listing it on Canada's only national database. So it's a great recruitment tool, and you can find that at mentorcanada.ca. And then finally, if you want to learn more about some of the research that we do, you can visit our Knowledge Hub. Finally, if you'd like to provide us with some anonymous feedback on today's event, how it went, what you learned, perhaps how we could do this better, and suggest some future visiting experts, you can scan the QR code on your screen to do that. Again, it is completely anonymous. And that's it. Thank you, everybody, for coming today and learning alongside us with Christian, and we'll see you next time.